All right, we are back with another episode of the Mogul Marathon Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Yannik Cudjoe, and I'm super excited for the guest that we have today. Our guest today is Eddie Symmonett. Now, Eddie is an active multifamily investor who has experience with multiple transactions with the limited partner side and the general partner side. But he started off with the purchase of his first duplex and 4 unit back in 2017 and has since then scaled up to do bigger deals, including a 36-unit deal, 48-unit deal, all through partnering up with other investors and high net worth investors as well. So he's originally from the Bahamas. His family has a successful track record of real estate investments there. So please, Eddie, thank you for being on the show today.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Yannick. Thank you for having me.
All right. So, Eddie, I know a little bit about you from meeting you at the GOB networking event a few weeks ago. Love your story. Can you please give the listeners a quick insight of your story and how'd you get to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Yannick, similar to you, I have roots from the Caribbean. So I was raised in Nassau, Bahamas, which is a small island about 30 minutes away from Miami, Florida. And the island I grew up on, really, really small, about 21 miles long, and with a population of about 300,000 people, right? So we have this little joke, you know, in the Caribbean, everyone runs, right? So it's like if you run too fast, you'll end up in the ocean. That's how small it is, right? So,
Right.
yeah, man. I mean, just a small, like, from a small island, and small and humble beginnings. But basically, growing up, my family was originally from Jamaica, and then they moved to the Bahamas. And I come from like a really hard working household, really hard working family that really believed in education, as well as investing, right? So my granddad, when he moved from Jamaica to the Bahamas, he made it a point to build a house, but instead of just building a regular house, just to live in, he built a fourplex. So he had the
Mm,
main suite where the family lived, and then he built a duplex on one side and then a studio apartment on the other side, right? So, I saw that growing up, and it didn't really click until, further on in my life. But I mean, just those seeds, like growing up, I saw that, right? So from that to, being able to have that experience with my big cousins of going in units and helping them paint, helping to clean out
mm.
units, like when tenants moved out. I had that experience, and as a kid, it sucked. But I got a little bit of
you,
money for
you
helping
you
out
did a
here and
lot of
there.
free labor, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
yeah, a lot of free labor, right? So it builds character, right? So saw that growing up, and basically, I always saw that, and thought, hey, if I didn't do any athletics, I would be interested in owning some type of business. I didn't know if it's going to be real estate or something else, but I knew, okay, it would be some type of business. So I was really athletic, growing up. I used to run track and then also played tennis, and that's how I ended up in the States. So after I graduated high school, I played a little bit of tennis, and then got a scholarship to go to college, a D2 college, in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So that's kind of like how I ended up, in the
Mhm.
States. Hmm.
Yeah. That's an awesome story. Just from having that background in real estate, I'm sure it gave you the juices at a very young age. I mean, I mentioned the free labor, but
Yeah,
just I think just being surrounded by something that you enjoy today definitely probably created a lot of passion that started off from a young age to get to where you are today. Talk
absolutely.
how talk about like the because I know from being an immigrant
Hmm.
from Trinidad to
Hmm.
the US, I feel like there's a different type of hunger when
Hmm.
you come from nothing, but when you
Hmm.
come from nothing in another country,
Hmm.
which is a third world country, right?
Yeah.
It's a different type of hunger. Did that
Hmm.
kind of create any character
Hmm.
which you
Yeah.
are able to kind of translate into you being successful today?
No, absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with that, Yannick. So, like, I definitely think, Caribbean households, like, education is really important. And one thing you don't want to do is be that person that came over here and didn't take advantage of the opportunity, right? So
Right.
that was kind of drilled into me as like a kid. Like if you get the opportunity to, go to the States, you need to make the most of it, right? So I mean, and I was kind of like, just an average student in high school, but I really picked my game up like when I was in college because, you on your own. It's not like I could just drive, 15, 20 minutes away and be with family, they thousands of miles away. So I mean, being that distant, you like, okay, I need to lock in and I need to make the most of this situation, right? So yeah, I mean, having that, expectation to do well, really stuck with me because I didn't want to disappoint my family, but that kind of drove me to push out and like do the best I could while I was over here, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always a different. I always say, it's a different taste in your mouth when you had to come from a third world country where you don't have the I mean things like even hot water, right? Or
Hmm.
AC, little things like that that I think people over in the US take for granted. I certainly sometimes have to check myself sometimes and understand that, hey, it could always be worse, but
Hmm.
I knew that you had some type of hunger from just coming from nothing. So I
Hmm.
know a little bit about your story, right?
Hmm.
And things that you had to do to get into real estate, specifically putting all the chips on the line and just going all in
Hmm.
to get that start in entrepreneurship. Can you talk about that transition between college and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, my junior year of college is kind of like where the light bulb hit for me. So I was studying business administration with a concentration in accounting in school. And I realized that's not really where my passion lied. So I had this particular class called computerized accounting, which is basically where you're using like QuickBooks and, just doing books and everything, right? I was really good at it, right? But I asked my
Mhm,
professor, I was like, if I chose this as a profession, is this how it's going to look day to day? And he told me, yeah. And then he started just going out and explaining, but it's job security and it's versatile. You can go anywhere and get a job and all that kind of stuff. It's good, benefits and retirement plan. I checked out like once he told me like I would have to do this, like this bookkeeping for like 20, 30, 40 years and that's it. Like I was like, no, it gotta be something else. So my
mhm,
junior year of college, I had the opportunity to go to a weekend event that talk about real estate. So it was literally like a Facebook ad. I was just scrolling on Facebook and this ad that popped up, build your wealth through real estate. I was like, that sounds interesting,
mhm,
because, in college things were thrown at me like stock investing, Forex, multi-level marketing. Nothing really interests me. But, when they said real estate, my mind kind of went back to that experience I had back home, looking at my family that was, successful real estate investors, right? And looking at the experience that me and my cousin had, like, painting units and helping out like around the units and everything like that, right? So I was like, okay, well, I know this is real because my folks did it back home. So let me see what they're talking about, right?
mhm,
So that was my intro into real estate. It was a 3-day weekend event, and they taught you how to wholesale properties, selling properties by assigning a contract. They told you how to fix and flip, and they told you how to rent properties as well. And for me, Yannick, it was like drinking from a fire hose. Like it was just so much information coming in. It wasn't really, it wasn't really learning everything in that 3-day time span, but it was like connecting with people, hearing testimonials, and seeing that it's possible. So I was able to connect with my first mentor, who was a real estate agent, but also an investor. And she lived in
mhm,
Birmingham, which is about an hour away from where I went to school. So I went to school in like Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where University of Alabama is. But I went to a small D2 school called Stillman College. So, at this time, my junior and senior year of college, I was driving, about an hour away. Keep in mind, I'm a student athlete. I'm working a part-time job at Ross, and I'm trying not to let my family down. I'm trying to get this degree, right? So it was a lot, man. I was
yeah, a
living
lot
off
of
of like,
pressure.
yeah, living off of like 3 hours of sleep and coffee, and that was it, man. But yeah, I mean, that was my intro into real estate. So having that experience at intern in Yannick, like basically those 2 years, my junior and senior year, I felt comfortable and I knew the market enough to where I was like, okay, I really have a decision to make, right? I can go that
Mhm,
safe route and I can go and get my CPA, go the easy route, the safe route, which is nothing wrong with that. Or I can like take advantage of this small time window I have right now where I had about like 6 months of rent saved up. So I was like, okay, I can really jump into this entrepreneurial side of life, give it a go, and if it don't work out, then just go back to school. And I was like, it's time to burn my ships, man. So I
Oh
moved
man.
to a new city, and I just got started in it, man, and started with like wholesaling properties, and then eventually got into like owning, like purchasing properties, purchasing
Yeah.
rentals.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that had to be, a scary feeling from college. I mean,
Hmm.
when I was in college, I didn't, man, did I have 6 months saved up? I don't think I did.
Yeah,
And
it's tough.
to
Yeah.
think about like just taking that leap from college, I mean, like you said, the pressures of your family saying, "Hey, don't mess up now. We brought you
Hmm.
over here. Don't mess it up."
Yeah.
And just having that courage to get into the entrepreneurship stage early on in your life. I mean, it's a great time to do it on one side because you I'm assuming that you don't have kids. Do you have kids?
Not yet, not yet. I'm
Okay,
looking
yeah.
forward
So
to that though. I'm looking
yeah,
forward to
yeah.
that
So I'm,
soon. Yeah.
you don't necessarily have like a ton of responsibilities, but still,
Yeah.
just having that, taking that leap of faith and just believing in yourself that you can create, a business from
Yes.
scratch, right? I mean,
Yes.
that had to be something that you lost, a few days of sleep
Yeah,
behind,
just to say it lightly, yeah, yeah. I mean, you already know, like they have this saying, right? That most small businesses fail within the first 5 years, and
Hmm.
I mean, it's true. Like those first few years in business, like you probably gonna work the hardest you work like in your life. Like if you ain't like a professional athlete or anything, but I mean, like that's it's really tough, man. Like getting a
Yeah.
business off the ground and take devotion, you know, um, you have to develop a skill set. I mean, the list goes on. It is tough, but it's worth it. It
Hmm.
definitely is worth it.
Absolutely. That freedom is just, it's just something about that freedom that's so good about entrepreneurship. It's hard to start off, but I love that freedom. So
Yeah.
walk me through the next steps, right? You
Mhm.
decided that you wanted to jump into the world of entrepreneurship. You got started with the 2 and the 4 unit deal. How did that
Mhm.
start off, and why did you start off in the 2 to 4 unit space?
Absolutely. So for me at the time, reading books and educating and getting educated and everything, I was trying to figure out, okay, what is the best way for me to get into real estate, right? And it just stemmed from what I could afford out of my own pocket. So that's kind of like how I thought real estate was done. It's just the money that you have, and then that's it. You save up and you afford a property, right? So why I started with a duplex is basically that was the only thing that kind of was in my price range of what I had saved up from wholesaling, the money that was set aside for my college that I didn't have to use because I'd gotten an athletic scholarship. So I had some starting funds, early on, to invest. So started with a duplex. So one of my mentors, he owned, him and his wife owned about 12 rental properties in the area, all single family but one property. And I just fell in love with the duplex. I just like the concept of being able to have like two streams of income at one location. You have to get a little bit of economies of scale there, where it's one roof, it's one yard you have to cut, but you have two sources of income on one property, right? So I really like that concept. So I was like, okay, of all of these properties, I'm really interested in this duplex the most, right? So
Hmm.
so the purchase price that we agreed to, I didn't have the full amount, to invest in this particular deal at the time, so I had to get creative. And at the time, you know, entrepreneurship is great. It's amazing to us and we get excited, right? But when you start talking entrepreneurship to a bank, that's almost like a red flag. They don't
Yeah.
like to hear that. They don't like to hear that.
Right.
Are you an entrepreneur? How long you been in business? 6 months? That's a red flag. They're like, no, no,
Right.
come back to us when you're already a mogul and you don't need the money. That's when the bank is interested, right? So,
Yeah.
so,
Exactly.
so for me, Yannick, I had to get creative. So what that meant was seller financing, right? I couldn't get a loan from a bank, but I could put some money down to purchase the property. And the seller, who was a mentor of mine, he was open to getting creative and doing a deal. So he held the mortgage instead of me having to go up to a bank. I paid him the same way, gave him interest and a term similar to like what a bank would have, and that's how I got that first deal done. So I bought it in a way to where, the mortgage was less than the amount of revenue I had coming in. So I had cash flow, right?
Hmm.
And for me, it's actually the property I live in right now, which is the
Yeah.
duplex. I live on one side, around the other side.
Hmm.
And basically, house hacking is how I was able to transition to doing real estate more full time. So how I was taught was it's two ways to go about it. You can either increase your income or you can find a way to lower your expenses, right? If you can
Hmm.
find a way to do both at the same time, that's even better. Like it cuts out
Absolutely.
that obligation, that living obligation you have to make your expenses low enough to where now you can take on real estate more full time. So for me,
Hmm.
it was living frugal, man. Like the same way I
Yeah.
was doing it in college, living off of ramen noodles and stuff like that. I took that
Yeah.
same approach when I got into like real life, and I was like, okay, if I can figure out a way to lower my expenses enough and still get income, then I can do this real estate thing full time. And it wasn't fun. Like at first,
Hmm.
like you have to take sacrifices, but I prefer to take that sacrifice than go punch a clock and work a 9 to 5. I'm
Hmm.
working on long term wealth. I'm working on generational wealth, right? So for
Hmm.
me, it made sense, and it still makes sense today. I live below my means even today with a net worth over $1 million. It's
Yeah.
all about delayed gratification, Yannick. Like how much can you put aside for the future as far as like comfort to try to
Hmm.
expedite your journey.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that's I 100% agree with that. I did the same thing from a house hacking perspective. Bought
Mm-hmm.
a duplex, lived in one unit, and rented out the bottom unit, and I still own that property today. Same duplex.
Awesome.
It's my first rental property. Bought
Yeah.
that back in 2019 or
Mm-hmm.
so, and I mean, I make good money. I make $1,000 off that deal. Easy every
Yeah.
month, and just having creating those sacrifices to put yourself in a position to be successful. I mean, that is the key to success, because
Mm-hmm.
if you don't, it's a saying that goes, if you don't sacrifice for what you want becomes the sacrifice.
Mm.
And that is something that has always been with me throughout my journey from the NFL, even today throughout my journey to, doing more and more in the real estate space, right? It's about
Mm-hmm.
sacrificing your whether it's your time or the money that you can spend on other things. I mean, it's success is all about sacrificing. That's how I got to the NFL, right? It's from
Mm-hmm.
sacrificing time spent with family or sacrificing time spent on with friends, right? But the
Mm-hmm.
the goal is the long term. If you're
Yeah.
long term focused, then you have to sacrifice. If you're short
Mm-hmm.
term focused about what's going on your day to day, you're probably not going to be sacrificing. So um great job with being able to get that at an early age as well, which helped you to get to where you are today. So
100%. And
so
real
yeah.
quick, Yannick, I just want to say this, like for the listeners too. That that $1,000 may not seem like much. That $250, may not seem like much, right? But you have to think about it like this. That's $1,000 that you don't have to punch a clock to work for anymore, right?
Hmm.
That's $500, $250 that you don't have to show up to work for anymore. Your money is working for you. Your investment is working for you, right? So that's the mindset you have to have as you grow in this wealth, because it's not an overnight process. It's not get rich quick. It's get rich for sure. You do it long
Yeah.
enough, it starts snowballing and getting bigger, and before you know it, you may have $5,000, $10,000 a month in cash flow coming in passively.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great advice. So okay, you started off in the 2 to 4 unit space.
Mhm.
What gave you the confidence to jump into larger multifamily deals and start, raising capital for bigger transactions? What gave you that confidence to do that deal in 2019 that
Mhm.
I'd love to talk about next?
Yeah. No, absolutely. So for me, it was just looking at other people, right? I'm looking at people around my age or a little bit older than me, and they're doing large deals, right? So I'm just asking myself, okay, well, why stay small, right? One person that I bought the fourplex from, he had owned like 300 units. And I was like, okay, if he can do it, why can't I, right? So as far as like my deal I did in 2019, at that time I had a proven track record. I had my duplex, I had my 4 unit property. I'd been doing educating, reading, networking, connecting with people. And I found this opportunity because the fourplex that I purchased, the guy across the street that owned an 8 unit, I sent him a mailer, right? And I just was like, hey, I own the fourplex across the street. Would you be interested in having a conversation, about selling one of your properties in the next 3 months to 5 years, right? So that's what the letter said. And then he reached back out to me, he said he was really interested because my letter was handwritten and all the other letters he was getting was just typed up. So he
You
was like,
took a
okay,
page out of the wholesaling book.
yeah, exactly, right? So I learned from that experience that I had with wholesaling, right? Make it personal. So I took the time, wrote out a personalized note to him, signed it at the bottom, sent it to him on a yellow piece of paper, and it got his attention, right? So we had connected, and it turns out he had owned a 36 unit deal and a 56 unit deal. The 56 unit deal he was already under contract on, and he had this 36 that he was trying to sell because he was slowly trying to get out of the business, right? So that's kind of like, that was like the go point for me, right? The gun went off, and I was like, okay, it's off to the races. I gotta figure out how to get this thing done. So over the years, from 2017 when I got my duplex and my 4 unit, now to 2019, I had been networking, going to events, talking to people, making connections. So I already kind of had an idea of what like financing needed to look like, right? So this deal was when I looked, it was dilapidated, 20% occupied. So it was
Ooh.
majority of the units was vacant.
You surely picked a good one for the first deal. 20%
Right?
occupancy.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have done any better than that, right? So, the only thing it was missing was like just people like selling drugs at the property. That's the only thing that was missing, right? So, I'm just playing. But no, I mean, so I was just thinking along that mindset of, okay, let me get into something that needs a lot of work, because that's going to allow me to negotiate a little bit more. And you bet I did. Like that deal, I think originally he wanted about 700K for it, and after we had talked through the things that was wrong with it and how much it would take to improve the property, we had collectively agreed on 400K purchase price.
400K for a 36 unit, man. I wish
400K,
I could get
man.
those numbers in my market.
Now let me tell you something, Yannik. I worked for every bit of that equity from that 400K mark to when it's now valued at like 1.7, 1.8. Every bit of that I had to work for, man. So, like I said, 20% occupied, dilapidated, a lot of low-paying tenants, and I had to turn this whole project around, right? So I went in with hard money, which is like a temporary loan, a higher interest loan, to finance 100% of my rehab, and then I hired a contractor to do the work for me, right? Now, keep in mind, this property I'm purchasing is about 15 minutes away from me because I live in Birmingham, Alabama. I also invest here, right? So this property is 15 minutes away, hired a contractor, and we thought the property would take us about a year. Well, I thought the property was going to take me about a year. That's what we agreed to on the contract. Ended up taking about 2 years to rehab, right? Not fun at all. And this is when the whole COVID-19 thing happened, right? So you have labor shortage, you have material increasing, as well as a contractor I had to fire because he wasn't meeting deadlines, right? So, I mean, it was a challenge. It definitely was a challenge. But one thing I would definitely say, what I took away from it is, buy properties right. If you're buying a property right, it gives you more space to when you get to those inevitable things that you can't control. Because in real estate, here's the thing, man, it's never going to be 100%. You may encounter something that you didn't calculate for, right? But what really separates the good people from the great people is how do you work through those situations when you have to show up and you have to perform, right? So for me, it was when I saw we were falling behind, I had to make a business decision to move on from that first contractor and hire someone else. And this go around, I said, you know what? I'm showing up every single day. So I put a hold on acquisitions. I said, you know what? I'm not looking at purchasing any other deals until I get this deal refinanced. So for me, that meant Eddie was showing up to the job site every day, checking on the punch list, making sure things was going smoothly. And had I not taken that approach, I wouldn't have been able to pull through on that project. So that was the secret on that one, like getting it to the point to where I refinance and we still own it today and it's stabilized. It was showing up every day and, not being afraid to get uncomfortable. If the contractor wasn't working out, move on, find someone else. But you got to do what's best for you, your investors, and your business, right? So about a year and a half, 2 years after I bought the property, we refinanced it with the local bank, and the value went from around like 500K when we purchased it to 1.6 million when we refinanced it, and the value is still going up today. And we only owed about 645 to the bank. So that's about $1 million in equity right there that I got from that property, and I still have today. So that one deal, even though I had to go through all that hard work, that catapulted my real estate journey. It took me from a net worth of maybe $2,000 when I first started out as like a kid straight out of college to a net worth of $1 million, over $1 million at
Yeah.
at the time I was like 24, 25 years old, right? So
Yeah.
that was huge for me, right?
Yeah. 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 So
Mhm,
I think there's a lot of, I want to unpack that a little bit because there's so many nuggets and just important things that you talked about that I
mhm,
think the listeners need to hear today, right? Because the first thing is deals never go 100% as planned. I've never had a deal that went exactly what I thought it was going to be. There are going to be times that you're going to have to just, get your hands dirty, especially when you're
mhm,
starting off in this journey. It's really important that you invest with someone like yourself, who is what I consider to be a battle tested operator.
mhm,
Someone who is willing to do whatever it takes to A, protect their investor capital,
mhm,
and then B, deliver, right?
mhm.
It doesn't matter if it's a hot sunny day, you're in Alabama. It doesn't matter if it's like
Yeah,
110 degrees, right? You are
yeah,
going to show up, and it might be days where it's tough to get out of bed, and it's like, oh man, I got to deal with this issue. But
mhm.
at the end of the day, Eddie is going to do whatever it takes to get the deal done, take care of his investors, and ultimately that's what's going to drive his success, right?
100%.
And then
Mhm,
another thing is, uh, how were you able to was did you create the equity like from was it market driven, was it operationally driven, was it rents, how did you create that, over $1 million worth in property value in 2 years?
mhm. Absolutely. So, mainly, and this is one of the reasons I love multifamily investing, right? You can force the appreciation, right? So when you look at multifamily versus single family real estate, the single family space and market is mainly driven. The values are mainly driven about around like what properties in the area are selling for, right? So they call it the sales approach with the appraisals, right? So basically, meaning that mainly, I mean, you can do what you can on your individual property, but appraiser is mainly going to look at what a property is selling for in the area. The reason I like apartment investing is driven by the income approach, meaning the more revenue you could show, the more net operating income that you have, which is your top line revenue minus all of your operating expenses, your net operating income, right? The more of that you have, and once you divide that by a cap rate or the rate of return that investor in the market is willing to pay for a property that's producing that amount of revenue, that equals your value. So to unpack that, basically, with me being an operator and increasing the revenues on a property, in turn, I have a direct correlation with the value that property has. For me, increasing rents, getting occupancy from 20% to a stabilized occupancy, right? Doing all of these things, to improve that value, it has a direct impact on the appraised amount of the property, and in turn, the amount of net worth that you have owning the building, right? So
Hmm.
how I was able to increase that value was taking it from, having 20% occupied, people paying $350, $400 in rent, to taking it up to where now people are paying $695 in rent at that time, $695 in rent, and I'm getting the people out that was paying like $350, right? So that's a
Yeah.
process and it takes time. But every single person you turn over, right? Every single unit you turn over, every dollar that you're increasing on rent, that directly impacts the value of the property, right? So
Yeah.
you have a control of what your property is doing. Now,
Yeah.
compare multifamily, Yannick, to other investment strategies. We can't really control what the stock market is doing. We can't really control
Hmm.
what the bond market is doing. We can't control what the Fed is doing. But one thing I like about real estate is you can directly control like what your property is doing and how that property
Hmm.
is being valued by you operating it and being, a good investor.
Yeah, no, that's
Mhm,
that's uh that's that's a great story for that deal.
mhm,
That I mean, that's the reason why I really love real estate, and I'm not a fan of stock market investing. I think there's a place in the portfolio for some folks who are willing to tolerate the risk associated and the fluctuations in the stock market. But for me, I'm all about trying to control my own destiny. And I fell in
100%.
love with commercial real estate because it has a direct correlation to the value based off of what you do and what you implement on the property. So I think it's a phenomenal job by you for one, seeing an opportunity in 20% occupancy, right? Because a lot of investors probably would have been like, I'm
Run
running
away.
far
Yeah.
left. But you were able to find an investment that you saw potential in and turn that uh, underperforming asset into something that's performing, that created this immense amount of value in such a short time. So
Mhm.
that is well done, and amazing job by you. Um, I want to talk about your future growth plans, given the fact that you were able to scale up from 2 to 4 units to 36 to 48 to 40, and just doing a lot of good stuff in the syndication space.
Mhm.
What are your growth plans for the future? Are you kind of staying more so in the middle market multifamily, or are you moving on into larger syndications? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, so my approach to real estate investing, I'm what you call like a vertically integrated operator. So what that means is, my focus is working in a similar market, a similar metropolitan area, similar city, and trying to grow out, my portfolio organically that way, right? So not really looking at too much other areas, as well as I own a property management company, right? So my main focus is infrastructure, right? So infrastructure is very important as you're continuing to grow a portfolio, especially if you having, smaller properties, right? Because the amount of dollars that you have that you can allocate towards payroll on maybe a 40 unit property is not as impactful as a 200 unit property. But if you're owning three, four, five 40 unit properties, collectively that's enough payroll for where you can get the same results, right?
Yeah.
So for me, owning a property management company, and having a local portfolio, my approach has been to, get into 40, 50, 60, 70 unit deals around that space, which has worked really well for me right now because it's not as much competition as 100 plus units, right? So for someone just
Hmm.
starting out, you may have to start in that space. Not you don't need to, but you may get an easier run starting in that space because there's less competition, if you will, as far as like being able to your chances of getting a deal. Now, when you
Hmm.
get into like the larger space, there's actually less buyers, but it's more competitive because those 5, 10, 15 buyers in that market, they control majority of the transactions. So
Yeah.
that's the change. And basically in that space, where on the smaller deals you may have been able to get a deal direct to seller, 80 to 90% of the transactional volume in the 100 plus unit space is controlled by brokers. So that's one thing I wish I did earlier is develop broker relationships. So
Hmm.
for me moving forward, it's a combination of both. It's working with other seasoned operators that, I is good synergies and we can collaborate to get a deal that's larger than I may be able to do in my own capacity, partnering with folks that I can work with to take down at 100, 170 unit deal. So, I mean, just last week I looked at and keep in mind, I'm closing this 40 unit deal, but I'm still looking at properties, right? So I looked at a 90 unit deal. I underwrote a 270 unit deal today. I'm going to tour next week. So it's, like you in your comfort zone, right? Let's say
Yeah.
you just picture like visually picture a circle or a hula hoop, and you in the middle of that hula hoop, that's your comfort zone, right? You need to get out of your comfort zone to get to the next level. So for me, looking at a 200 unit deal, that's out of my comfort zone. Looking at a 90 unit deal, that's out of my comfort zone, right? But you have to do that, and then you have to realize that, hey, that wasn't that bad. It was the same thing when I was going from a 4 unit to a 36 unit. Like, hey,
Yeah.
like just jumping out and doing it, that wasn't that bad. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. You understand what it takes to close that type of deal. So yeah, I mean, so Yannick, right now we're looking at closing, deals around the 50 unit range locally, as well as 100, 200, 300 deals with other operators. So a combination of both. And the
Yeah.
goal is for us to close 2 to 3 deals a year. My goal this year was 200 units. We may or may not hit that, but I'm working towards that. And then moving forward, same approach, like 2 to 3 units. I mean, 2 to 3 deals a year, and continuing to grow out. And eventually, as we get more infrastructure, since we'll be right now we manage 90 units, about to be 130, is going to be a point where we're managing 500 units, 1,000 units, 2,000 units. At that point, we have that infrastructure to where I feel more comfortable going further out, maybe going an hour
Hmm.
out, maybe going into that Atlanta market, right? So it's all within time. you
Yeah.
know, yeah.
No, that's a great way to put it from a vertically integrated perspective of just growing your real estate business, right? Are you because on our end, we have an in-house, you know, so to speak, a part-time, repair and maintenance guy, right? We have like different properties, 18, 22, and we have an in-house part-time R&M handyman who we use as someone that handles our R&M tickets from our property management company,
Yes.
and we have an internal leasing that we use instead of utilizing a property management company. Were you able to be are you able to be more competitive on offers because you have those vertically integrated infrastructure systems within or business units within your overall real estate business?
100%. I mean, 100%. Like you, especially if that's your market and you live there and you operate there, having an infrastructure, I wouldn't say, in some cases it would allow you to operate more affordably, but in most, the main thing is being able to hit your business plan and hit your projections. I feel a lot more comfortable saying that we can rent a unit $75 higher than my competitors because we've done it on other projects in the past, because we can
Yeah.
provide optimal service, because our team is showing up to our properties day to day. Every single day, they just focus in on our portfolio. So the time that's going into our properties, we're beating our competition as far as the amount of attention and detail that we have, right? So because of that, it's a better experience for the tenants, which makes me more comfortable to be more competitive with market rents, and in some cases, either on par with market rents or challenging market rents to go a little bit above it, right? So
Yeah.
for us, we may be able to offer a little bit more than someone that's coming out of state and that's outsourcing everything, because we have a full-time property manager, because we have a full-time maintenance tech, a part-time maintenance tech, as well as like an on-site leasing agent, right? So having all of those people on the team, makes me more comfortable to compete. And it
Yeah.
just gets better like the larger you get. So at 500,
Yeah.
1,000, 1,500 units, you may have a corporate side to your business now. You may have a COO, you may have a controller, you may have an accountant, and bookkeepers in office, right? Wouldn't you feel more comfortable going after a larger deal in that space versus having to start from scratch and find all of these people? I mean, for me, it makes
Hmm.
me more comfortable. So that
Yeah.
so I definitely think it's a benefit for sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, man, that's so much golden nuggets there. I think there are two things that I think about when you talk about that. The first thing is the attention, right? Because when you have some people in house that focus just on your soul, your portfolio, they're not worried about another investor's, portfolio. When we talk
Hmm.
about, a property management company, right? You're hiring someone that you are developing under your systems, what you want to deliver from a customer service perspective to your tenants, and just the ability to have the control over the outcome that you have, or that you can have when you have that in-house property management company. I think there's so much compelling results that you can have on that side. And then the second thing is just the economies of scale, being able to cut your costs across different asset classes because you have an expense that you can share amongst the different properties, right? I mean, you're basically kind of negotiating with yourself, right? Versus another property management company that has a whole set of different expenses and infrastructure that they have to pay for. I mean, your costs and what you can do across all properties. Is that your way of thinking as
Yeah.
well?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, so, the more focus you have, right? Like, the more, that you're able to utilize, like, your team, just focusing on your assets, I think, the less distractions it is, right? So,
Yeah.
so for me, definitely, it is a huge benefit, and, I think you can utilize having that team if you're buying deals that's 10, 15 minutes away, versus if I were to buy one deal in Alabama, one deal in Georgia, I may not be able to utilize my maintenance tech because that's a 2.5 hour drive, right?
Yep.
That's a lot of the day, that you're losing if they going out
Yeah.
all the way out there to,
Yeah.
fix a
It's less
leak, right?
efficient.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, even though we're vertically integrated, but I try to be strategic in the properties that I'm buying also, right? So I want them in the same MSA, in the same
Yeah.
demographic, like in the same city, until we get to that point to where we get a regional manager. We may
Yeah.
have maintenance supervisors, right? At that point, you have that team in place to where you can take down a property and still have that same level of service 2 hours away, 3 hours away, because now you got the right people in place. So for me, it's, until you get to that point, try to get properties within the same metro. And then as your team gets larger, y'all can go further out.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's perfect, man. That's really perfect.
Hmm.
So how do you see the real estate market, specifically, let's say commercial real estate, multifamily, given the interest rates that we've been seeing being increased this year, the cost of debt, where are you, how are you seeing the market today, and, how are you underwriting deals, and what's your overall, overlook of today's environment?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely challenging, right? I mean, last year was COVID, this year is inflation. You know, I'm a firm believer in not just looking at the market, but also looking at the deal and how can I engineer the deal to make sense with current market conditions. I'm a firm believer of that. I don't believe that real estate is a game where you sit on the sidelines and wait, to purchase. I don't think is ever optimal time to purchase. Like you have to take the cards that you dealt and try to look at each individual deal on a deal by deal basis and figure out a way to make that transaction work if it can work. Now, maybe this year no deals work out, right? Maybe it's two
Yeah.
deals that work out, right? That means that you may need to look at more deals and get more creative. I definitely think, our approach, especially on the deal that we're purchasing right now, has been how can we mitigate our risk in the current market conditions, right? So everyone knows interest rates are going up. The Fed is increasing, their basis, which is in turn increasing, the rates for the loans that we're looking at, right? So for me, it was like, okay, how can I mitigate that risk? So even with the deal I'm looking at right now, we went with a more agency option, a more conservative option to mitigate that risk. So we went in with like a lower interest rate. We were able to lock that rate at application, meaning,
Nice.
while we got the property under contract, we can lock that rate day one. So that takes away some of that uncertainty of where our rate's going to be in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days.
Hmm.
We already locked day one, you see? So that's
Yeah.
taking risk off the table, right? Even though we know that interest rates are speculative right now and it's trending up, how can I mitigate that from getting a loan product that they are willing to lock that rate day one? So we have that, right? Another way is, basically looking at leverage. It's now is like probably the most expensive time to borrow. So maybe instead of going for the maximum amount of leverage on the deal, maybe raising a little bit more capital to balance it off. So I feel as though as investors, we have to be in tune with what the market is doing, and we have to make conscious decisions on how we need to adjust our underwriting or our approaches on purchases and deals through any market cycle that we're looking at for sure.
Yeah, that's a great methodology. That's the same way how I look at real estate too. Is, how can you engineer the deal for it to make sense for you and your investors?
Hmm.
There are a lot of things that we can't necessarily control interest rates. We can't
Hmm.
control liquidity in a market, right? But what we can control is how we're able to engineer the deal for it to make sense, but then
Hmm.
also taking into consideration all of the macroeconomical factors that definitely do impact your deal in some way, shape, or fashion.
Hmm.
But uh, it's always a good time to buy real estate. I mean, as long
Yes.
as it's an asset that is cash flowing, I'm interested.
Yep.
And you
Yep.
made a great point about risk as well. We can't control where interest rates are heading, but
Hmm.
how we look at these deals that have larger transactional amounts and more debt on it is from a risk adjusted perspective. If there's a way to take risk off the table, we're all about that.
hundred
So
percent.
that's a really good point.
Hmm. Yeah. So I mean, as an investor or someone just starting out or someone looking to get in the multifamily space, understanding where the market's at and how do you need to pivot or adjust your underwriting or your business plan or your approach to purchase that deal accordingly, right? So I
Yeah.
never, I don't think this is the time to sit on the sidelines. I think this is the time to go out and look at deals, build relationships with brokers, put in offers if they make sense. You need to be active, because when the market does shift, right, and there are those fire sale opportunities, you want to be the first person someone is thinking of. And if you on the
Mhm.
sidelines through all of this, they go into the people that was active. So
Yeah.
now is the time to still be active. Look on things by deal basis. Don't just throw up your hands and say, interest rates is going up, this is it. You have to pivot and adjust accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
No, that's really, really great advice.
Hmm.
So you've been on this real estate journey for quite some time now. If you had to start this real estate marathon all over again, what would you do differently that would contribute to your success?
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. So, I like that, the marathon approach, right? So it definitely is a marathon, right? This is not a sprint. This is not a Usain Bolt race. This is the long-term race, man. It takes
Not a
time to get.
100-yard dash.
It's not. No, you it's a mile long race, right? Marathon, right? So basically, one thing I think I would do definitely earlier is develop more broker relationships. Like when I first started out, especially from a background of wholesaling where you're taught and fed that you have to go direct to seller on everything to make a deal work, right? So I took that same approach when I transitioned over to like multifamily. I have to get right in front of the seller. I have to do a deal with the seller or it's not going to be a deal. That's not the case. Like in my market and in most markets, multifamily brokers, especially when you get into like the larger space of 40, 50, 60, 80, 100 unit deals, they're controlling 80% of the transactions in that market. And that's just the name of the game. They have the relationships that they've cultivated over years in their brokerage firms. As a property owner, that's probably the first person you're going to go to when you're looking to sell your property. So as an investor, you have to understand that. And like for me, that's one thing I would have done earlier. Start developing relationships, taking people out to golf, taking brokers out to lunch, like getting to know them, like getting acquainted with them. Because here's the thing, when that property owner calls them about selling their property and they may not want to go through the whole marketing process and they want to sell it quickly, who do you think the brokers are going to call? They're going to call the people
Yeah.
that they have a really good relationship with, right? So for me, I would still do everything the same that I did, as far as, the properties that I own. I still would buy that 36 unit deal, the 4 unit duplex, because, if it wasn't for those properties, I wouldn't have been where I am today. But one thing I would have did earlier is, as I'm looking for these off market deals, still develop relationships with brokers simultaneously. And I think, I probably would have gotten more transactions done had I done that earlier. But now it's like I realize that and I'm doing that every week. you know,
Yeah.
I looked at a property last week with a broker. I'm underwriting one that a broker sent me yesterday, right? So it's just, understanding that you need to keep your pipeline full. You need to keep your pipeline full. And the best way to do that is to do both. Reach out to these sellers
Yeah.
directly, but then also have those broker relationships and communicate with them and try to get deals done that way as well. Like the deal we're purchasing today, it's the 40 unit deal we have on the contract. It's through a broker, but it's off
Mhm.
market through a broker. So check this.
Mm.
I have a relationship with the broker. He had an opportunity. I reached out to him and I was able to get that deal before it went to market from a broker relationship.
Yeah.
So you can do both. That would be my
Yeah.
my thing that I would change. Like develop those relationships earlier, because at the end of the day, this is a relationship business. Whether it's
Yeah.
to acquire properties, bring in investors, partners, people are gonna work with people that they like, know, and trust first. So you understanding that it's a relationship business. You need to make that a priority. Developing relationships with investors, brokers, property managers, owners. You need to be doing that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's there's this thing where they say on to get on a broker's list is one thing, but to get on the short list is
Yeah.
another thing. And I think
Yes.
the way to get on that short list is by closing deals in your market. And
Yes.
that's when the broker starts reaching out to you and saying, "Hey, this deal is coming on the market, or I have this deal coming up that you might be interested in that fits your profile," because they can take you much more seriously once you have established yourself as a closer. And then
Hmm.
sometimes you're probably not going to be the highest offer, but the fact that you've established a track record that you can close is something that can be beneficial to your business through just creating that relationship. So I 100% agree. Definitely broker relationships, leverage that as much as possible, because there are many times where, I've seen deals that end up in a newspaper and I'm just like, that's in my criteria. Like, why don't I know about that deal? So
Yeah,
finding all of the, finding maybe the top 5 to 10 brokers that might be in your market. Really, it's usually around, like you said, about 5 people that control all the deals in one
yeah,
market. So if
yeah.
you can find a way to get on those lists and just close deals, or if you close deals with another broker and you tell them about it, that's a
Hmm.
great way to end up on the short list. So Eddie,
Absolutely, yeah. Mhm.
um, if our listeners will if our listeners are interested in following you, following what you're doing in the real estate space, or potentially investing with you in your company, how can they find you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I'm active on all social medias: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, at Eddie Symmonett. So at Eddie Symmonett, Symmonett. But yeah, you can find me on all of those stuff. I also have a YouTube channel, so I do have free content on there that explains like my processes, how I underwrite deals, and basically, just more candid approach to the day-to-day stuff in real estate, right? So you're going to see that if you follow my social medias, right? You can also email me, esimonet@gmail.com. Yeah, and if you have any questions or you want to learn more about how investing works, feel free to reach out for sure.
Perfect. Well, Eddie, thank you so much for being on our show today. I'm sure our listeners got a ton of value out of a lot of things that you touched on today. Thank you for our listeners for tuning into today's episode of the Mogul Marathon Real Estate Podcast. Let's go out there and take action and be great today. And remember, real estate is a marathon, not a sprint. Run your own race. Thanks again, Eddie.
Yes. Thank you. Appreciate it. Take care, y'all. Thank you.